You guys, of course, know what time it is. The day before a brand new major release from Nintendo, we have reviews. And if you're new to the channel, what we do pretty much is take all the reviews gathered from some of the major sources and kind of compile them into one big cohesive review from myself. Just picking across the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly from the reviews that are out there of Donkey Kong Bonanza. So that way you can just get everything here in one single video. But I highly recommend that you watch some of these reviews. I'll link them down in the description down below so you can check out each and every single one of them individually. They all offer something very unique and distinct from one another. But yes, how are the reviews for Donkey Kong Bonanza? Well, real quick before we dive in, we are super close to 370,000 subscribers. We're on our goal to 400,000, and you guys can make it happen very quickly by simply leaving a like and subscribing. It goes a long way, so let's see how many people we can get to subscribe here on Donkey Kong Bonanza Eve, if you will. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's dive into the reviews. Donkey Kong Bonanza comes in at a 90 on Metacritic, which is a tad bit lower than I think a lot of us were expecting. I was expecting around a 93, 94, but a 90 is still really good. It's probably going to drop a little bit lower as more reviews come in, but yes, it is now tied with Donkey Kong 64, believe it or not, as the highest rated Donkey Kong game. I cannot believe that Tropical Freeze is as low as it is. An 83 for that game is absolutely berserk to me, but you know what, whatever. But yeah, Donkey Kong Bonanza is sitting at a 90. So today we'll be dissecting reviews from IGN, Nintendo Life, Digital Foundry, and Eurogamer in order to come up with a cohesive kind of summary of how this game is performing. So let's start off with IGN. IGN praises this game from start to finish and says that the digging and smashing rocks. I threw that in there because, you know, there's a lot of rocks in this. Okay, you get it. But yeah, pretty much the controls are perfect and the digging and smashing just feels absolutely amazing. Apparently, it's very complex interplay between different elements. There's a lot of different elements that you'll find and explore and things that we haven't even seen so far that have different properties. And I guess there's a lot of really cool interactions with how the different, you know, materials and stuff interact with the bonus rooms and different challenges, so I'm definitely looking forward to that and seeing some materials that maybe we haven't seen so far. Apparently the challenge rooms are great, and after 50 hours of gameplay from IGN, they are still looking for more bonus rooms, which is crazy. That's a lot of content for a 3D platformer made by the Odyssey team. There's some really cool area that I want to talk about with the materials here, where there's like color warping between red and blue. We've seen similar stuff like this in Mario games, but you actually punch one color and it fills in the other color, which is just something that's really incredible. So I'm hoping there's a lot of stuff like that, and it seems like there is, which is awesome. Now, IGN mentions that it's not required to get a certain number of Bananium gems in order to get to the next area. Like Super Mario Odyssey, you had to get a certain number of power moons, but there's hundreds found after just 20 hours of main story. So the game doesn't seem to be that long at all. You can probably just bust to the end, which, you know, every Nintendo game is like that. We knew that was going to happen, especially with a 3D platformer, but there's well over 50 hours for 100% completion, which is really good to hear. But then we get into some of the negatives, and I'm going to say right now, this is a negative that is across the entire board for a lot of people, which painfully upsets me. But there are a bunch of frame drops that you'll experience in specific moments in the world. Now we know this game is made up of nothing but voxel tech, where there's nothing but breakable material from enemies to terrain, so obviously there's going to be a lot of slowdown in certain areas, so I guess this was kind of expected. But it gets a lot worse, and we'll talk about it later on. But moving on, apparently you almost always have full Bananergy, which I noticed when I played the store kiosk demo. I was always able to transform almost on the fly. But apparently this makes the game very cheap sometimes, especially at the very beginning, because apparently lots of the earlier bosses you can beat in like 30 seconds by just punching through them, which is a fear that I definitely had, just the bosses being way too easy. But apparently the late game bosses are some incredibly good ones. And apparently IGN stated that the game has an unforgettable finale. IGN finally gives the game a 10 out of 10 and calls it a masterpiece. Next up, we have Nintendo Life's review. They say that the game has a silky smooth moveset for Donkey Kong that is just so buttery to roll around, jump around, and just feels like Mario Odyssey again, but this time with Donkey Kong. And it's not a smash-a-thon. If this was something that you were worried about, where you're just spending nothing but all your time just smashing objects, no. There's lots of platforming elements and lots of puzzling to do on the overworld too. It almost splits splits each world and each level into 2 separate regions, the underground and the above world, where they feel completely different, which is pretty cool. But Bananza power-ups feel way too strong in the beginning. Once again, just like IGN mentioned, it makes the bosses a breeze, but ramps up way higher later on. A wonderful soundtrack is in this game, and apparently Nintendo Life states that Paulygon's songs are absolutely peak. There's tons of music cameos as well. They claim a bunch of them are from Donkey Kong Country, which makes me so happy because Donkey Kong Country has some beautiful music. Nintendo Life states that it is a short game if you don't look for everything, like we already talked about, and they are one of the only reviewers that talk about the sculpting mode, which is interesting because, yeah, it's not a major mode, but it was pretty interesting to use the mouse and Joy-Con mode in order to decorate this design sculpture that you can make. But they actually said it's surprisingly deeper than it looks, and it's actually a fun little side mode to play around with. Now, Nintendo Life didn't notice too many frame drops. They said for the most part 90%, it was like 60 FPS, which is a completely different story for a lot of people, so I'm not 100% sure about that. But they did complain about a sluggish camera at times, and that there was a lot of pop-in, that the camera would drag behind in some areas where you were digging or get focused on the back of DK too much and you couldn't really see where you were going. And yes, there's a lot of pop-in. You'll see areas just kind of pop in the background as you get closer, and it'll be kind of jarring, which is just not great for the Switch 2 being month 1 and having those issues. But Nintendo Life does finish and state that Odyssey is still better to them, but this game is a 9 out of 10, being excellent. Digital Foundry comes in and gives us a real good technical overview of the game. So if you want to see the technical side and how the game actually runs, I recommend watching the entire review from Digital Foundry, where they really dive into it. Once again, links in the description. But they state that the camera issues are not that bad, and it actually shows you where the tunnels and other underground areas are while you're underground in a separate camera view, which is pretty cool and pretty unique and intuitive. But they also go on to talk about how beautiful the graphics are. They really are a lot better than Odyssey. However, there's a lot of issues. There's lots of pop-in once again, and really bad shadow rendering, where the shadows of some characters and objects just look blurry and choppy. But it also has very inconsistent frame rate. Here they can even show it in one of the boss battles that the frame rate drops to a low 30 FPS the entire boss fight. And you can even see it with the way that the walls are moving of this boss. It's very choppy and very slow, and it just looks off. They also break apart the lighting and how it doesn't look that great in this game, and how even the Switch 2 version of Mario Odyssey does a lot better with its graphics. Now, once again, this is a game about destroying the world and breaking apart the world, so it's bound to have some slowdown, but apparently there's a lot of small little issues with the graphical side of thing, according to Digital Foundry. But they do note that it has a beautiful soundtrack with lots of callback tracks, and it's a lot faster pace and more freedom than Odyssey ever gave. Then we move on to the final review from Eurogamer, and they seem to be more on the lower end with a lot of the problems this game has, but it's funny because they say it's just shy of being like a perfect game. It's just these little small things just could be ironed out to make this game so much better. But they start off the review immediately just praising the ending, which is very unique. They actually go on to say that it's the best finale of any Nintendo game ever. They claim it has the same intensity and kind of shock factor that the wedding ending of Mario Odyssey had, so I'm very hyped for that. They say some layers feel like some filler, but there are layers that are really, really great and different and unique. The skill points are not that interesting and don't add a whole lot to the Bananza transformations, but the bosses, they took a different approach. They actually said that the boss battles are repeated a lot, but just with different materials, but they're really, really good. And for an example, they said it's like fighting every Zelda dungeon boss, but twice, which doesn't sound horrible, but once again, they claim that the bosses really ramp it up towards the end of the game, and that's when you'll start to see some really creative things. There are tons of post-game challenges, and that's the best part of the game by far, apparently, is just going back and finding some of these bonus challenge rooms. Some of them are really, really difficult, and they're just all really well incorporated into this game with some great designs and puzzles. And apparently this game is very heartfelt and tugs at the heartstrings a lot with its story, and they claim that it's way more heart than any Mario game has ever had, and actually has some really memorable moments. So I'm actually looking forward to that. I'm glad to hear that a 3D platformer, and just one made by the Odyssey Odyssey team alone actually has some story to it and some heartfulness. Like, are you kidding me? That's great. But Eurogamer once again has some really minor complaints overall, and those minor complaints still drop it down just 1 star, giving it a 4 out of 5, and they claim just shy of a perfect score, which is a shame because I feel like once again the main reason comes down to that graphical side of things. So overall, the game is awesome. It's short but filled with content and tons of replayability, tons of challenge rooms, tons of collectibles. The movement feels great. The bosses are repetitive, but you'll get some really good ones late game. But overall, it seems like it's a really well put together game. But the only big gripe is once again the frame rate. The frame rate drops multiple times. There's lots of pop in. The shadows and lighting don't look as good as other games on Switch right now. So yeah, that is a big drawback, and it still just bothers me. I'm sorry, it's just so unfortunate that Nintendo games are still being held back in its score and reviews simply because of performance. And it's not a good sign, I think, right now, considering the fact that this is one of Switch 2's biggest titles. In fact, probably their biggest one, a big 3D platformer just a month into their brand new Switch 2, and everybody's been hyping up this hardware, how much more powerful it is than the original Switch, and something like a 3D Donkey Kong game is struggling at a lot of points. So it scares me for the future of like an ambitious new open world Zelda or an ambitious 3D Mario. Are those games going to have issues? I know those games aren't going to be world destroying voxel tech games like this one is, so probably not. This one's probably in its own different case because of that. Once again, I recognize that, but still it is a little scary, and it just makes me just sometimes wish Nintendo would just dumb it down and have a PS5 version of their own Nintendo console. Just a big, powerful, strong home console. Just ditch the portability and have the graphics, because it's almost like holding developers back. I feel like there's so many games that would get 10 out of 10s, 9 out of 10s, just a lot higher scores if the game could just run better, and that's just not a good sign, especially when this is something that's been going on since 2017 where the original Nintendo Switch released. But at the end of the day, I am just so excited for this game. It seems like this game really is a master's class of 3D platforming, and apparently a lot of people still think Odyssey is just slightly better. I've even seen some people say that this game is better than Odyssey thanks to the free exploration and stuff, but it's going to be hard to say until I officially get my hands on it and play through the game entirely and see, does it really stand the test of time against Odyssey? Because Odyssey is just such a perfect game to me. It's going to be hard for it to beat that. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully you are more excited about this game like I am, but definitely let me know in the comments down below how you feel about these reviews. Are you excited about this game even more now? Or are you less excited? Definitely let me know down below, and make sure you leave a like and subscribe before you head out. And like always, I hope you have a blessed day, and I'll see you all on the next one. See ya, guys.